The organ hummed through the nave like a warm tide, and I sang the way I always do, eyes closed, mouth soft, hands clasped over a hymnal worn down by Sundays. My husband, Charles, sat on my right, the crease of the bulletin already folded and refolded into neat boats he would abandon in the pew. To my left, the aisle was empty, until it wasn't. A shift of air, a quiet apology, and a young man slipped into the space beside me. Daniel. I knew his name the way small towns know everything, from a cashier who mentioned his mother's bakery, from the deacon who praised his work fixing the church fence. His sleeve brushed mine when we stood. I thought nothing of it, tried to think nothing of it, but during the second hymn, Come Thou Fount, he leaned in. I like how you close your eyes when you sing, he whispered, voice just for me. It's like you feel every word. It was not a compliment, not really. It was a noticing, and it made something in me rise and hold still. I opened my eyes. He had the kind of steady look that doesn't ask permission to exist. Charles cleared his throat. I lifted the hymnal higher, a shield made of pages and habit. After the benediction, we stood in the slow shuffle of parishioners and coats. Daniel stayed close, a respectful distance I somehow felt on my skin. At the door, he held it for me. Have a gentle week, ma'am, he said. He did not look at Charles. He looked at me the way a question looks at its answer. All afternoon, the whisper lived under my ribs, not the words, how they landed. I told myself it was nothing. The mind finds weather in the barest wind when a season is ready to change. On Monday, the house moved the way it always did, dishwasher humming, the wall clock insisting on its little tyrannies. Charles left early, returned late. Commentary parceled out in sentences that could be set on coasters. Traffic was a mess. The market dipped, picked up dry cleaning. I tried to forget the pew, the voice at my ear. I did not succeed. Wednesday, on my way home from the post office, I saw Daniel across the street lifting sacks of flour from his mother's pickup. He raised a hand. I pretended I didn't notice and immediately hated the pretense. That night, Charles watched the news with the sound too loud and the lamp too harsh. "You're quiet," he said without looking at me. "I'm always quiet," I answered, and the truth of it stung. I slept lightly, dreamed of wooden pews and paper boats. In the dream, the boats floated down the center aisle, and I stood at the end, waiting to see what reached me first, habit or tide. On Thursday, I ironed napkins no one would notice. I baked a lemon loaf I didn't want to eat. The house had the smell of effort without celebration. When Charles called to say he'd be late, relief and disappointment arrived arm in arm. I sat at the kitchen table and tried to pray for something safe, patience, gratitude, the ability to be content with what is. Instead, I prayed, without words, to be seen. Immediately, guilt found me, tidy as a ledger. Married women don't pray for that. Married women are seen. I opened the back door for air. Across the fence, Daniel's porch light was a small, deliberate star. I could hear his radio low, an old song about rivers and names. I stood there longer than needed, holding the edge of the door like it might misbehave. When I finally closed it, the house seemed to exhale into its familiar quiet. I loved my husband. I loved our history. but I could not remember the last time I felt like a person with edges and light rather than furniture that matched the room. Friday afternoon, a knock. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door to Daniel carrying a brown bag that smelled of cinnamon. "My mother overbaked," he said, smiling. "Thought you might help us not waste it." "Charles will be home late," I heard myself say, as if that detail were a border I needed to paint in bright lines. Daniel nodded, not stepping in, not leaving. "Then you won't have to share," he said. "May I set it on the table?" I moved aside. He placed the bag down, then looked at the vase of eucalyptus I never seemed to replace. "That green suits you," he murmured, like a person admiring a painting and discovering the painter in the corner. "It's a plant," I said, too brisk. He didn't flinch. "I know," he said softly, "but you chose it." We stood in the pleasant, awkward quiet of two people who are trying not to admit they are listening to the same thing, the sound of a line being approached. He left after a minute, a courteous exit. When the door clicked shut, I pressed my palms to the table and felt its sturdy grain, the ordinary certainty of it. I cut a thin slice of the cinnamon bread and ate it standing up. It tasted like autumn deciding to be brave. Sunday came dressed in sunlight and propriety. Charles adjusted his tie and told me about a golf tournament I was not invited to dislike. "You'll come by after service?" he asked. He meant, "Will you do what we do?" We slid into our usual pew. The aisle to my left stayed empty until the first hymn swelled. Daniel took the space again, a quiet courtesy of proximity. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. During prayer, I felt him the way you feel a storm an hour before the clouds agree. When we stood for the gospel reading, my hand brushed the wood where his had been moments before. My body read the imprint like braille. I glanced back, only once, and he met my eyes. No smirk, no apology, just recognition. After service, in the fellowship hall, Mrs. Talbot spooned potato salad and asked questions with her eyebrows. "Your neighbor is helpful," she said to me, a sentence that could wear suspicion if fitted for it. I smiled the way women do when they are holding a glass and a grenade. In the car, Charles said, "You should bake that lemon thing again." "I will," I said, and we both understood we weren't talking about dessert. The next week, I stayed after to stack hymnals. Daniel appeared with a box and a nod, working beside me without chatter. When we reached the last pew, a book slipped, our hands went for it, and we touched. It was not dramatic. It was not nothing. "Thank you," I said, withdrawing a fraction too slowly. "For what?" "For noticing the books were heavy." He smiled at the aisle. "I notice things." Outside, the sky had that pale, forgiving blue of early spring. He carried the box to the closet, and then, at the doorway, paused. "I don't want to cause you harm," he said simply. "You won't," I lied, which is how you tell the truth when you're not ready to know it. That night, Charles commented I'd been distracted. "Not unhappy, I hope," he added in the tone of a man running inventory. "I don't know the word," I said. "Maybe I'm restless." He turned back to the television. Everyone gets like that. It passes. It didn't. On the fourth Sunday after Epiphany, my hymnal felt heavier than a book of songs should. Perhaps I'd picked up the wrong one, the leather stiffer, the paper newer. But when I opened it, a slip slipped from between the pages and landed in my lap. A folded note. The crease was precise, a square, as if neatness could disguise audacity. My heart knocked once, hard. I did not look back. I did not look right to where Charles tapped his foot off the organ. I kept my eyes on the alto line and pretended to hum while my fingers, disobedient, unfolded the paper. Do you ever wish someone really noticed you? The question did not announce its author. It didn't need to. The handwriting was even, spare, a carpenter's script. Recognition is not always thunder. Sometimes it is the softest rain reaching ground. I pressed the note between my palm and the hymnal's thin page and sang the rest of the verse with my mouth, but not my breath. During announcements, Mrs. Talbot thanked the volunteers who repaired the garden gate. Daniel's name joined the list like a bell rung inside my chest. I kept my gaze forward. The sanctuary smelled of lemon oil and winter coats. Charles coughed into his fist, a metronome that knew one song. After the benediction, people bloomed into aisles, gathering coats and gossip. I stayed seated, waiting for the pew to empty, the way a swimmer waits for a wave to decide itself. When the aisle cleared, I slipped the note into my purse, nodded at the deacon, answered questions about weather and Wednesday study, and stepped into the cold. At home, I set the note on the kitchen table and stared at it as if it might pronounce a verdict. The kettle clicked on, and I forgot to pour. The words were not large, but they occupied space, a chair pulled out at a table set for one. Did I wish? The question embarrassed me with its simplicity. The body knows before the mind learns politeness. I took a pen, then put it down. I took a different pen, as if ink could change the kind of woman I was. I drafted a longer answer in my head, an essay about years and how dust settles on a person's edges. But the page resisted speeches. It wanted something true and small enough to fit in a palm. I wrote 3 words: I think yes. No flourish, no apology. I folded the paper back into a square, mirroring the original crease, because some courtesies are anchors in moving water. That evening, I returned to the church under the pretense of arranging flowers. The door gave its familiar sigh. I slid the reply into my hymnal, page 244, where Come Thou Fount waits like a habit, and closed the cover. Only then did I permit one glance at the empty pews. They looked like rows of unasked questions. I went home, and the relief of an answer already quiet. On Tuesday, Charles noticed, but the wrong thing. You're using too much salt, he said, pushing his dinner away. It wasn't the food, it was the air. It was me not being the table he wanted to set things on. I tasted a forkful out of courtesy. It was fine. I can make something else, I offered. He waved a hand. Forget it. My appetite's gone. The news filled the room. From the kitchen doorway, I watched a man I had promised to love become a shape beside a lamp. Later in bed, he tried conversation like a coat he wasn't sure still fit. We've been off, he said. Work's been a bear. I'll take you to dinner this weekend. Your favorite place. The one with the stiff bread and the violinist? I asked. The one with the reservations, he said. It'll be nice. He meant well, he did, but he did not see me. Only the idea of me that fit into reservations and routines. I wanted to ask when he last noticed the way I hum when I peel oranges. Instead, I said, "That could be nice," and listened to the room inventory our quiet. Wednesday, I walked to the market. Mrs. Talbot at the florist said, "You've seemed busy." "Just errands," I replied. At checkout, a young cashier asked, "Baking today?" "Perhaps," I said, oddly grateful to be asked anything simple. I took the long way home, past the church garden. The rosemary Daniel had trimmed stood neat and brave. I thought of going in, inventing a task, polish, candles, then sat on the low stone wall until my breathing steadied. When I returned, the house closed a little around me, as if it had learned my measurements too well. Charles called to say he would be late. I said, "All right," and stood very still in the kitchen until the clock found me. I took out my phone. I typed, "We need to stop." Backspace devoured it. I typed, "I am not okay." Backspace again. Finally, I typed nothing and set the phone face down like a dangerous instrument. Night came with its small noises, the clink of pipes, the sigh of vents. In bed, Charles turned his back to me. "We're fine," he said to the dark. "Everyone goes through phases." I stared at the ceiling and felt the ache of an unlived hour. Out the window, Daniel's porch light clicked on, then off. I envied the honesty of a switch. I went to the sink and drank water with both hands, as if thirst were the only hunger I was allowed to name. In the quiet, I pictured a life with edges, a table set for two because both people were present, not merely seated, a voice that did not need permission to speak. The breaking point wasn't a scene, it was a sentence. I cannot keep dissolving so other people feel solid. I didn't say it aloud, but once I heard it, it would not be unsaid within me. I found him in the church garden on Thursday afternoon, trimming back the rosemary that grew wild near the stone wall. The plant had grown into a tangle of green and blue, small flowers brave in the chill. I told myself I was there to bring cut flowers for the altar. My empty basket told on me. I had brought my hands and my unsteady breath. He straightened when he saw me. "Laura." He said my name like a small prayer finally dared. The pruning shears hung from his fingers, a held breath. We stood in a small drift of fallen needles. The air smelled like kitchens and Christmas, and something a little medicinal, as if the garden meant to heal what people complicated. "This is wrong," I said first, the way a person sets down a law before opening a door. "I know," he answered. "It doesn't change that it's true." "What is?" He looked past me toward the sanctuary windows, how they caught sky. "That I think about you in the spaces where my life is supposed to be simple. That I notice the way you tilt your head when you listen. That you carry silence like it's your job and still manage a kindness that doesn't cost anyone else a bruise." The words landed like stones stepping me across water. I wanted to be indignant or virtuous. Instead, I was honest. "I wake up before the alarm to listen to a house that doesn't need me," I said. "I do crosswords just to hear a word match me back. I cannot remember the last time I laughed without checking who else was in the room." The town hall bell marked the quarter hour. He set the shears on the wall. "I won't be the reason you're hurt," he said. "You're not the reason," I answered. "You're the mirror." He reached, not for my waist or shoulder, but for my wrist, the inside where the skin tells the truth. His fingers were warm from work. I didn't pull away. We watched a bee test the rosemary. "What happens now?" he asked, and I understood he meant more than today. "Now we breathe," I said. "We do not pretend to be spotless. We do not invite scandal. We do not lie more than we already have to ourselves." The rules sounded like scaffolding, humble and temporary. He nodded. "I can wait," he said. "I'm not trying to steal something. I'm trying to give you back something I think you've misplaced." Which is permission. We stood there long for a cloud to move and the light to find us again. I picked a sprig of rosemary and tucked it into my basket, absurd in emptiness. "I don't know where this leads," I said, "but I know where staying mute has kept me." He smiled, not triumphant, relieved. "Then we'll walk slowly." "Slowly," I echoed. And when our hands fell apart, the warmth stayed like a promise written in skin. On Sunday, the sanctuary looked newly washed, as if the morning had been poured through stained glass. Charles adjusted his tie and checked his watch. "We'll have to leave right after the benediction," he said. "I'm meeting the foursome at noon." He kissed my forehead absently. We slid into our pew. The aisle to my left held a rope of sunlight. I told myself I would not look for him. Telling the sea not to be wet would have been easier. The organ found its first chord. The congregation rose like a single body deciding to stand. From the corner of my eye, a familiar gait. Daniel took the seat beside me and set his hymnal down, as if the act were an oath. He did not speak during the opening prayer. He bowed his head and kept his hands folded. I copied him, then let my fingers relax. During the reading from Corinthians, Charles's breathing grew heavy, a soft thunder. The pew vibrated gently with his doze. It would be funny if it weren't a biography. We sang "Come Thou Fount." I kept my eyes open. On the word grace, my voice trembled and steadied. The sanctuary smelled of wax, lemon oil, and mint. Mid-verse, Daniel leaned in, not a display, a drift, and the warmth of his breath found the small shell of my ear. "One day," he whispered, "you'll stop pretending you don't feel it." The words didn't bruise, they opened. They didn't tell me what to do, they named what was happening. I felt the years I had spent wrapped in good behavior loosen by one knot. I sang the last line like a person coming up for air. Announcements arrived like laundry lists. I heard almost none of it. When the benediction ended, Charles stood quickly, eager to beat traffic to the golf course. He shook the pastor's hand, clapped a deacon's shoulder, and headed for the car. I lagged half a step. Daniel didn't linger either. He carried a box to the sacristy, returned it empty, and let our shoulders almost touch in the flow of people. We did not speak. Silence had learned a new language. In the car, Charles said, "You coming to the tournament dinner?" "No," I said. "I'm going for a walk." "Again?" he asked, baffled that repetition could belong to someone else. At home, the lemon loaf waited on the counter, ordinary. I sliced it, set 2 plates, laughed, and put one away. I changed my shoes. I stood in the hallway mirror and saw a woman whose edges were returning, like coastline. Outside, the day chose mercy, mild air. I walked the block to the church, then past it, as if momentum had a plan. I did not know whether I was walking toward Daniel or away from my old self, only that either direction meant the same thing. I could not be the echo of my own life anymore. The whisper was not a sin, it was a summons. I walked until the sky decided on dusk. At the corner by the church, Daniel stood by the fence he'd mended, hands in his pockets, like a man trying to be smaller than he is. "I can't keep hovering at the edge of your life," he said before I could speak. "You don't owe me anything, but you owe yourself the truth." In my pocket, my hand found the old, softened linen of a handkerchief my mother gave me when I married. I thought of vows and years and the kindnesses that had kept us afloat. I thought of the silences that had built their own house inside our house. I thought of the woman I had become to make everything easier for everyone else. I told myself fidelity meant never changing shape, I said. But maybe it also means being faithful to the person I am when no one is watching. I went home and told Charles the ugliest, cleanest truth. That I had been lonely a very long time in a marriage with 2 people in it. That I needed to separate, not out of spite, but to stop disappearing. He stared past me at the doorway, at some future where I wasn't in the frame. "Is there someone else?" he asked. "There is someone who sees me," I answered, "and I need to see myself too." It was not a fight. It was paperwork, eventually. It was tears, then numbness, then the faintest relief that felt like breathing without measuring each inhale for approval. Weeks later, I walked into church and sat in the same pew. Not beside a husband who slept through the readings, not beside the ghost of choices I was too frightened to own. Daniel came and sat quietly next to me. No note, no performance. When the hymn began, he leaned toward my ear and whispered, "I'm glad you didn't run." I sang with my eyes open. When the last chord faded, he took my hand. It felt like the answer to a question I had been asking since the beginning of myself. We walked out together, past the fellowship hall and its potato salad and opinions, into a morning that smelled like cinnamon and rosemary and new paint. The town did what towns do. It guessed, it gossiped. But the chant inside my chest drowned it out. I am here, I am seen, I am alive. Not reckless, wild the way a river is wild, with a destination, with grace, with its own necessary truth.